Hey guys, thanks for listening to another episode of the Rough Stuff podcast. We've got a killer welding and fabrication Q&A for you today with 3 industry experts. This podcast went on so long, we had to cut it into 2 episodes. This is the first episode, which mostly focuses on fabrication, so make sure to follow up in a few weeks for the second half where we answer your welding questions. We hope you enjoy this podcast, and please send us feedback on our social media accounts or email us podcast@roughstuffinc.com.
This is Rough Stuff podcast number 6 with me, Garrett, and I've got Mallory here.
Hello.
And our guests today are Dan Trout, Kevin Kirkegaard from WFO Concepts. Did I say that right?
Yes, you did.
And Joe Thompson from UFO Fabrication. What's up, guys?
Morning.
Morning.
So the reason we wanted to have you guys on is we originally reached out to Dan to do a fabrication welding Q&A. And then you, Dan, suggested we also have Kevin and Joe talk about this episode. So I think this is going to be pretty rad because there's a lot of people out there that are going to have a lot of just fabrication questions I think you guys can answer for us. So Dan Trout, can you explain a little bit of your background in welding and fab and also your history in the off-road industry?
I started in high school. My brother was kind of responsible for that. He's 5 years ahead of me, and he had a metal shop. So when I got to school, that was my main focus. I didn't like school. Got picked on a lot, and wasn't very good at sports. Just as soon as I stepped into that building, that's where I wanted to be. I would come in before school and weld. I would come in during lunch and weld. If my teacher stayed late, then I'd stay there and weld as long as I could. Then I left school, ended up at a continuation school where they had a machining ROP program. Got set up with a sheet metal shop. Was I 17? And stayed there 5 years or so. Ended up starting my own company at night when I was 20. And what is that? That's 14 years ago. I wouldn't recommend anybody going that route.
Was that B&B out in Rancho?
Yep.
Yeah. And 20 years old you started, right? You said?
Yep.
Dang.
That's impressive.
Yeah, I don't recommend that.
In business, but not in fab.
Yeah. Fishmouth started, in 20. I was doing side work out of that shop. It's 2005, and then 2007. I just had enough and being hard-headed and young, and thought I knew everything. That's what I wanted to do, and I wouldn't change anything. But
Do you think a lot of that change had to do with wanting to be your own boss?
no, I think I've always been individual. Like, I'm not a team sports guy.
Mm-hmm.
So it's
Just do your own thing.
yeah.
And then what about, how did you get into off-road? So, you became a fabricator and were welding for a long time. What made that change for you?
My brother had a 72 K5 Blazer, and his friend across the street was building, I think it was an early Bronco. I don't remember what year, but I watched both of them build that throughout their 4 years in high school. By the time they were done, it was fully restored, and it was baby blue and had 38 SX swampers on it. At that time, that thing was a monster truck. This was 90, 98, 97 probably. I was like, that's really cool. And then my friend Ryan's dad had a early 80s Blazer with 35s on it that we'd go down to the river and drive around in. And then he got a Jeep Cherokee his sophomore year. And I ended up getting my Toyota junior year, so 1980 Toyota pickup. And every weekend I was cutting something off of that thing and rebuilding it. My dad come out and, what are you doing? You got to drive that to school tomorrow? And like, I got the back axle out of it, and leaf springs are all out of it. And just figured it out.
And then, so Kevin, I know we know each other briefly from the industry, but I don't know really a bunch about your history. Like, what got you in the off road? How long have you been with WFO? Like, what's your background?
It's, I mean, not as good, not as as much welding as Dan and Joe, but I started with construction. My dad owned a construction company, but he wouldn't let me work for him, so he put me on one of his framing crews and kind of just built homes from there. And I love framing. I love building something from the ground up to see the final product. So I started just throwing a hammer around, and then kind of dabbled on the side. A buddy and I bought an 80s Toyota pickup, and I built my first cage, one of those pump jacks from Harbor Freight, the little orange things that pinches it in the middle. Threw it together with some. I mean, I even left the threads on the end. You know, just notched the threads and right to it. It was ugly, atrocious. Kind of dabbled in it, never really got into it. Did that for many years, and then 2005-ish, you know, when the economy started going down a little bit, kind of got out of it, and my buddy just left WFO to go do an AutoCAD. Phil Blurton at No Limit. He's like, hey, there's an opening here. You might want to go try it out. I'm like, all right, I'll try something different. And I didn't want to be there. Well, I didn't not want to be there. I just didn't expect to be there for more than 3-5 years or something. Just kind of a jumper. 13 years later, I'm still there. And shop manager, lead fabricator, do all the design stuff now. And we have a shop of 15-ish guys, and just kind of worked its way up from there. So, I mean, I did the welding school in high school. Did the auto shops through my whole entire high school and college and all that kind of stuff. But the off-road just kind of fell into it a little bit, and then just love building with my hands. So it's just created from there.
Do you have any personal builds?
Yeah, I got a really sweet Toyota that I loathe. Built, I mean, we can, all three of us, we can build whatever we want, but it's always like the contractor always has the worst home. You know, the master fabricator always has the worst vehicle at home. Yeah. So it's just, we just haven't gone around to build one yet, but hopefully soon I can build something for myself. Yeah. Much better.
Just never have any time.
Never have time to build something for yourself.
Yeah, when Garrett built his 83 Toyota, I think maybe we took it out, I don't know, less than 10 times over a really, really long period of time. It's kind of sad.
Yeah, people always like, you work at a fab shop, you must go camping every weekend. Yeah. No, I go on the big trips 3 times a year for that.
It's like the majority of the employees that they get to have more fun.
They have the most fun, yeah.
Yeah, definitely.
And then Joe,
yeah,
what's your background in off-road fab, and what's like UFO fab, and what do you do? What do you specialize in?
Yeah, so I kind of got a later start than these two guys, actually, even though I'm the old side of all of them. But early on, I was a BMX grom, so I was a big BMX rider when I was a kid, and I had a local company that was building bikes in Oakland. So, and I didn't ride for them, but they were all in my local group, and so I was very aware of fabrication and TIG welding, and they were all kind of a badass bike, right? So at a very early age, I bought my own TIG welder. My story is kind of similar to Dan's. I dropped out, when I was a sophomore, and pretty much went right to work and bought a TIG welder and just started welding junk. Like I was totally self-taught. And then I got hooked up with a family friend who owned a high purity stainless business, which is all TIG welding, all high end stuff. And so I got thrown into the wolves with some really, really good welders right away. And that guy who I first worked with was meticulous. So there was no room for error at that shop. And so everything he taught us or taught me was, it had to be, there was no room for, it's just okay. So I kind of got that pushed into me kind of early on. And I went on to build some bike frames and that kind of stuff as I got a little older, and I worked at some more fab shops doing more high end, type TIG welding and fabrication, and then slowly branched off and doing cages for race cars and Harley junk and a whole bunch of random stuff. At the same time that was all going on, I was heavily immersed in design. So suspension is one of the things that is like a passion of mine. So even from an early age, I was doing mountain bike suspension design of my own stuff. I wasn't like building it for anybody, but it was a huge area of study. So then as time went on and I got more into cars and that kind of stuff, I really started to apply more of that, and some pieces of the puzzle fell into place where I was able to get in a position to do something for this guy or do something for that guy in a car. And then all of a sudden it led to a car. Then, I met the Gomez brothers at a race one time. They had a problem with one of their cars. I said, I'll fix that for you. And they didn't take me seriously at first. They kind of like, oh, who is this guy? And I'm like, I can fix it for you. It took like 4 or 5, I'll fix it for you before they let me fix it. And then kind of the rest of history. Then they let me build some cars and, here we are.
That's cool. Yeah. So how do you all three know each other? Is off-road industry, or was it? I know you're in the BMX, but Dan, you were in the BMX back in the day too, right?
Let me start. So I've always been a fan, even though I'm the oldest. So I used to follow Dan on Pirate.
As did I. Yeah, always followed Dan Fishmouth.
Yeah, he shakes his head like he's all modest and stuff. But I remember way back before ever. I remember he built 30 friggin' cars. I've only built 8. Right. To put it in perspective. Right. I'm 49. How old are you, Dan?
35. Yeah,
so that's a pretty big difference in age there, right? So he's got a lot more cars under his belt, and Kevin's done a ton of stuff as well. He's done way more. If you count total sheer volume of things that they've built, like even though I'm the oldest, I've got the lowest number, right? So Kevin's always been at WFO, which I've known him forever from there, and so he's built a ton of cars. I've always been a fan. That's all I'm trying to say.
So Dan Trout is your hero.
He's my hero, basically. Yeah,
okay.
That's
he's
what I'm saying.
He's my hero too.
I know. Chalk one up for me too. Yeah, it's always a.
We actually have an employee. I won't out him, but he is a huge fan of yours. And Garrett let him know that you were going to be on the podcast, and he was like, "Oh, I follow him on Instagram."
So basically, we're all here because of Dan.
Yeah, we're all pretty excited. One thing, kind of off topic, I wanted to ask you: did you know Rough Stuff started as a mountain bike company?
No.
It originally, because you started in fabricating mountain bikes. Dan Fredrickson, our original owner, he started it with a couple guys in like the 80s, and they were building mountain bike frames. So if you actually look at our
what was
logo,
the name of the company?
It was Rough Stuff. So if you look at our logo, those tires, they used to have spokes.
Yeah. And they
actually do they still? And they used to be mountain bike tires. So
that's cool.
Then it kind of fizzled out. Dan did like River Guide and all these E-Trade, and you can go listen to our first podcast. Yeah. But that tells the origins of Rough Stuff. But then he circled back and got into off-road. So it's just kind of funny that you guys can have a conversation later about it.
Yeah, and I never dabbled with building bikes, but I always mountain bike my whole life, BMX and everything. So I think we all started from the same.
Trout rides too. Yeah, he has in the past.
Yeah, I started with BMX also, and I was actually just thinking about that. So solid bikes. It used to be ran by Aaron Huff. We would go ride over in Roseville where their first shop was, and I remember going inside and seeing their CNC machines, and they had Hale in the back, and he was welding frames together, and that was another thing. Like, oh, I'll build bike frames. Like, I wasn't really thinking about off road at that time, but I kind of knew of Joe a while ago because Ventana Mountain Bikes was across the parking lot from B&B, and I remember hearing his name over there from one of the guys that used to work there. But they built really, really nice aluminum mountain bike frames.
So what we did is we posted on social media, and we let people know we were going to have some experts on the podcast, and we said, what do you guys want to know about welding, fabrication? And these are the questions they came up with. So one of the first ones, I think you'll, Joe, be very excited, is link geometry. So 3-link versus 4-link practicality on street legal rigs, as well as full-blown race cars. So, these are open for all of you guys to answer, but... Yeah.
I guess I'll start real quick. So I'm a big, be clear of your end use kind of person. So if someone just says a blanket question, what's better, 4-link or 3-link? That's not a real question. You have to really ask yourself what the vehicle is going to be used for ultimately. And you got to be real specific about it, because people kind of will shortchange what they're going to do. Oh, I'm going to build this Jeep on 35s. I'm going to build it with 40s. I'm going to add all this stuff. You need to be very clear on what your end goal is. So if you have the end goal clear in mind, then, let's just say it's going to be a street driven rig. It's going to be a 3-link with a panhard in the front and a steering box, and, possibly a 4-link in the back, some good sway bars, and you're good to go. If it's a race car, it's going to be 4-link all the way around. If it's a straight axle car, if it's IFS, it'll be IFS in the front and 4-link in the rear, and pretty straightforward. And also, I mean, the reality is too, is if it's just a leaf spring car rig, there's nothing wrong with that either. I mean, you can have just as much fun in a leaf spring car as you can a lint car.
Do you think leaf springs get a bad rap?
Well,
Was
that's a pun intended, right?
I guess so, yes. I didn't really see that one coming.
I think a leaf spring car's rig is good as long as it's set up properly. I mean, I've seen some leaf spring rigs just make link rig look stupid.
Yeah, so
on the trail.
So we.
Back to those Toyotas again.
Yeah,
Always
Toyotas
sprung.
all day long.
Jason Shear's CJ that he uses the pre-run end is sprung under in the front with the trailing arm 4-link in the rear.
Bypasses.
He's got bypasses with air shocks in the front. That thing will outrun like half the Ultra 4 field.
Such a clean CJ.
Well,
and it holds his whole family.
well, hold on. That's also him driving too.
Yeah, exactly.
He would outrun the whole field in a go-kart.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Anyone else have any? Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say, what about like link geometry design? I know that's like a pretty, like when you're new to building suspension, the first thing you do is you go online, you start researching because that's the resource that you have. I mean, what have you guys found to be true and not true, I guess, with that kind of information?
So I mean, it's nice nowadays with the companies like Rust Up, WFO, and all of us who are making parts for the end user that we've kind of already figured it out for you in a way where here's the truss you're going to run, here's the link mount, here's what the kind of setup. So it's kind of, you're taking the dummy work back in the day, 15 years ago, we're all trying to figure it out and just cutting some flat strap, rounding the edges, throwing a hole and mount it where it fits and see what happens. But nowadays you have cross members already built. So it's pretty plug and play in a way where you're not trying to figure too much out.
Like, have you guys, I doubt you guys have like been online and like researched that in a long time, but like if you go online and like look up like 4-link kit, there's a lot of stuff that's like, make your upper link needs to be 70% of your lower link, or there's like all these rules, like the gap between the lower link and the upper link on the axle side needs to be 25% of the tire diameter or something like that. I remember, and I remember calling up actually Dan when I built my first 4-link, and he's like, it's pretty hard to mess up a 4-link. I'm like, okay, and like built it that night, but it's really easy to overthink it with all that information online. And
oh, definitely. I get those phone calls all the time. Like, I put this in the calculator online. I'm like, oh God, just stop right now. You're overthinking way too much right now. I see those calculators. I'm not even.
So real quick, I never have used one.
No.
Yeah. I haven't used a calculator either.
Mm-mm.
Depending on what website you go on, they're not all the same either. So that doesn't help either.
I do have a general rule though. I don't know if Dan can chime in on this, but I definitely use a general starting point. Mine is like a 20% rule. So if it's if it's like separation, link separation, for example, if it's a 4-link in the rear, the front distance vertically might be 20% less than the rear. That's kind of like my starting point. And then I'll fine tune that a little bit there. So if it's 10-inch separation in the rear, the back axle, it'll be 8 inches in the front, something of that nature. Mm-hmm. And then I'll kind of tweak it from there to get the thing to do what I want to do. But that's like a general basic rule I use in the back. And then the other general rules I use is I make the links as long as I possibly can in the rear, but that's from a go fast perspective, so that's not necessarily always the best case, from a crawling perspective.
Goes back to like your intent, right?
Yeah. Your intent. Yeah.
What you're trying to get done.
Can one of you guys explain anti-squat versus squat?
Joe?
Suspension.
Dan?
Guru.
They're just pointing at each other.
I wanted to ask that because I remember when I was first trying to do my 4-link, the first thing you go to is online. Then you're looking up the calculator and just kind of playing with that. And they, you run the number and it's like, oh, you have 50% anti-squat. And it's like, what's that percent mean? Like to what? Does that mean like it's going to come down halfway? Or so I'm sure other people have the same question. That's why I wanted to bring it up.
I don't remember a whole lot of it, but I do remember if you had 100% anti-squat, I believe that was neutral, basically. Is that right?
I don't remember it being that way, but I'm not sure.
So how do you guys then how do you then do you just set up your suspension cycle, or do you just know like, hey, I've done this so many times, this is like my baseline, I know this is what I want?
Yes.
Yeah.
So like on the anti-squat thing, so obviously it's kind of simple, really. It's really not that tough. The shorter the links, and the closer your chassis mounts are together vertically, the more anti-squat you're going to get, which also equals wheel hop if you really want to get really crude about it, right? So
How hard it's planing the tire.
How hard it's planing the tire. So the torque reaction that you're going to have. So when the wheel is trying to rotate, if you have 100% traction, for example, and the wheel is trying to rotate, if the link is short and the front chassis mounts are close together, it'll act as a unitized swing arm, for example, and it basically wants to jack the back of the car up in the air or bring the tires up under the car.
Like when you throw it in gear and the whole thing just springs up 3 inches.
Yeah. So if you put it in low range and you hold the brakes on, that whole, where the back end's trying to come down, that's anti-squat. So, if you go the other way, where the link mounts and the chassis are far apart from each other.
Like a parallel.
Yeah, parallel or even reversed. Mm-hmm. Then when you get on the gas, the rear of the car will sink to the ground. And then you'll actually have virtually no traction because, if you're trying to climb a ledge, the tire has nothing. It's just got its own weight kind of holding against the rock, and it has nothing to help kind of drive it into the face of the rock. And so then you end up just spinning your tires everywhere you go. So having that balance of torque reaction and a free moving suspension is kind of like what people are shooting for on a rock crawler. And really, it's not that crazy. Like I think what Dan was saying, you can definitely do a parallel setup and it'll still work really freaking good unless you do something really dumb. So, as long as you have just a little bit of link separation difference from the front to rear, front being smaller, I'm talking about front of the rear axle, chassis side, then you're pretty much going to be okay as long as you don't really screw the numbers up by going either really short on your links or overly long or something like that,
Yeah, there's a lot of stuff that works. It's just what works better for what you're trying to do.
And there's a lot of stuff that on paper shouldn't work.
But it does.
But it does.
Real life versus...
There's plenty of those rigs running around that do amazingly well with some that should not. You're like, oh, that's not going to work. And yes, it does. And you just walk away.
And it's purpose built too, because the moon buggies, they might want that squat, that traction differently or something.
Yep.
Yeah,
Yep.
suspension from a competition rock crawling buggy is completely different from an Ultra 4 car. You're trying to do two completely different things.
Yeah, if you're throwing in a Jeep, daily driven, and then, on the weekends going out, it's a completely different rig.
Exactly.
You just don't share that one 12-inch long bolt under your frame. Just separate it a little bit. Inside the frame, bottom of the frame, you should be just fine.
Yeah.
Actually, talking about the 4-link and 3-link, on like a 3-link, the 4-link I feel like, again, is pretty easy to do for like simple like rock crawler. It's pretty basic, right? The 3-link in the front with the steering and all that other stuff going on, I feel like is way more complicated. So do you guys want to go into that at all? Like how you would design like a 3-link with steering, with roll steer or bump steer?
It's just a lot more moving parts. That's the only thing that makes it more complicated.
You know who's an expert in that one right there?
Kevin.
Such
Kevin,
a pain.
This is all you, buddy.
Such a pain.
You can take this one.
There is so much more work in a front end than a rear end. Rear end, you can literally just slap together. I mean, those mounts can go wherever you want, pretty much.
Unless the motor's in the back.
Unless, I don't do that. So you guys, another world there. But the front, with the 3-link, it's you get your lower set, get your axle set, get your steering kind of set up. And that upper link, it kind of shares the same values as in the rear, where you want that separation on the frame, separation on the axle, and you're going to be more straighter with those 3 links instead of, you're not going to triangulate that 3rd link, and you're going to not get bound up with that panhard bar. It's pretty much a parallel 4-link, but a parallel 3-link in a way, but you're dropping that one on the frame a little bit lower. And then you definitely always want, with the steering box, you want your track bar to be the same angle. If those track bars and the drag links aren't the same angles, you'll be getting a bunch of bumps here, and it's going to react and go all over the road with you.
And when you're crawling too.
And when you're
crawling, you put some steering input. It'll make the suspension move up and down and do weird stuff. 3-link's the easiest to mess up, I would say.
Easy to mess up. And I always love it when I see 3-link, like front and rear, and they put the track bar the same way, or the panhard bar the same direction. So when they go up something, the whole vehicle just shifts over to the right or left. Instead of, and if you look at a TJ, they're opposite of each other. So when they go up, it stays neutral.
Yeah, when I set up mine, the way I figured it would work the best was I started tacking everything together, have multiple hole mounts, and started cycling it. And I set it up at ride height, and I think I cycled it up to limit how much reaction that caused to the steering box, because I figured if it's at full droop, it's like, who cares, because
that's a max travel
I'm
number.
Jumping or something, right? Yeah, it's like droop. There's not force coming back into the box. It's more of a anti-squat. And So I don't know if that's right or wrong, but it seemed to work well. I didn't have like a lot of feedback in my steering.
Yeah, and the front too. Also, you got to look at pinion angles because wherever you mount that link, and you can kind of mock it up with PVC or whatever you have laying around, just kind of C-clamp it to the frame, and then cycle the travel of the axle and see where it goes. And that pinion can either, if it's too short, it's gonna drop that pinion. If it's too long, it's gonna pivot up in your motor or something like that. So there's a happy medium where you want to create that axle, and that's why like a parallel 4-link, it's gonna stick. It's going to stay where it's at throughout the travel. I mean, it's going to go up and down, but it's going to point towards the ground as it comes all the way at full droop. Radius arm, you're going to keep it pretty much pointing right at the T-case. So you're going to get better driveline angles in the front. We've been doing, I hate to say it, but a lot of radius arms on a lot of the bigger trucks just because it kind of acts like its own sway bar. You just have 2 points of the frame, and then your uppers dive right into it.
And they're not massive travel either. They're
not massive travel. 8, 10, 12 inches max.
You correct me if I'm wrong, but like a radius arm setup is great for a street-driven rig that doesn't have a huge amount of travel numbers because it gives good street manners, correct?
Great street manners, yeah.
But it doesn't climb worth a shit.
No, it's not the best off-road. You can always undo one, like the driver's side front or driver's side upper, and then you can go for the weekend. It's kind of like a 3-link then in a way, and it flexes a little bit better. Get back on the road, throw it back in there.
Well, you go back to a 3-link with an individual upper, and it should be flat or slightly inverted when it's sitting at ride height, because if you have it pointed, if it's pointed down, same as your lower links, to a point where when you pull up to a wall and you're trying to go up it, the chassis is just going to separate from the axle, and it'll go until it hits the straps or it bottoms the shocks out, and then it'll start climbing. Like you watch stock TJs or Cherokees mainly.
Don't insult the Cherokee. Come on,
they get enough.
They don't climb very well, and those come stock with radius arms. But if you switch it and you put an individual upper link on there and you have it perfectly flat or slightly inverted, and you pull up to a wall, the axle will want to suck itself up to the chassis, which will then climb up without lifting the front of the car. Just my opinion.
I know the answer to this, but I know some people, I've gotten this question a few times, but with like a normal steering box, like why would you do a 3-link versus a 4-link?
You can't.
You can't do a 4-link in the front with a steering box. Just it's going to, well.
Okay, some people have done it.
You can.
And it doesn't work very well.
You can if you get crazy.
Yeah.
But then it gets really overly complicated. But go ahead. I'm just was interrupting with.
No,
Go ahead.
No, I was the 3-link just works the best because everything's traveling together. When the cycle of the suspension goes up and down, you can't have an axle that goes straight and then your box wants to turn your tires. So you're binding everything all at the same time.
Needs to move in the same arc.
Yeah.
In short, if you have a 4-link in the front and a steering box, as the axle goes up and down, you will get bump steer, unless you do something crazy where with the drag link going front to rear versus side to side, which then you're opening a whole new can of worms.
Yeah, well, you can do a 4-link, a parallel 4-link, but you can't do a triangulated 4-link.
Correct.
The triangulated 4-link's going to keep you straight up and down. The parallel is
parallel 4-link's not really a 4-link.
That'd be like a
It's
parallel
it's actually a 5-link.
Would be like
the whole entire setup. Yeah, 5-link with the panhard.
We're gonna be precise here, Kevin. Okay.
Yeah.
That would be like a Jeep, like TJ or JK like style suspension, right?
Yeah.
You're talking about?
Yes.
Parallel, okay.
Well, a lot of the TJs, Rubicon Express, they come, radius arm, but then you can upgrade and do different stuff too.
Well, it's 20 minutes on one question. Yeah. So the next one is this person wanted to hear some tech talk. I know it'd be hard without visuals, but suspension and axle comparisons would be a good start. I want to hear leafs versus coils versus coilovers versus air shocks, stuff like that.
Yeah, purpose built again. It really depends on what you want, like the end goal. If it's a rock crawler, daily driver, or moon buggy, or what. I'm not a big fan of the air shocks. I don't ever really use them in my world.
Yeah, I'm not a fan either. I think they worked better for the comp buggies, just because you didn't have a coil wrapped around the outside. You could tuck it in tighter against things and not really have to worry about hitting things. I've never tuned them or messed with them, but
Can you tune an air shock?
I think Yeah, I think it's nitrogen pressure and the amount of oil that you put inside of it.
Oil level height you can change.
Okay.
Changes the progression.
Overrides it, really, yeah.
But I think they're right though. If it's a full body rig, I wouldn't even ever consider an air shock ever. It's gonna be a coilover.
Your comp buggies, it would just slow moving things. I would consider an air shock. That's about all it's good for.
Exactly.
What about the coils? I mean, you guys even mess with coils really, or is it just coilover?
Coils work. I work with a lot of coils. On our Jeeps and all that kind of stuff, use coils all the time. But you're limited on travel because you're only going to get so much extension out of that coil before it comes popping out of your pocket. So I'll use them on the bigger trucks. A coil and a really nice shock or a simple shock. It could be a bypass to a 2.0 Rancho or something like that. But it depends on what you're doing, daily driving or rallying your truck on the weekends. But yeah, the coils, you're really just limited to, until that separates fully, then you're just depending on your shock. And
I can't explain this from a technical aspect because I haven't really thought about it a whole lot, but a coil does offer a different style of ride as well because the way it's bigger, the spring progresses in its travel is different than a leaf spring. I think a leaf spring is more progressive, right? Mm-hmm. So a coil will tend to offer a linear, more plush ride throughout the travel. Just because the spring is maybe more linear. Does that sound right?
I mean, you get progressive rate coils too, but yeah, you're linear. It's just the same rate.
Yeah. I mean, I remember you saying it the wrong way, but like a leaf spring, for example, a leaf spring might be soft initially, but they get stiff pretty quick. Mm-hmm. And they have that harsh feeling, whereas coil spring has that plush kind of reactive feel through, from full bump to full droop, I don't know if that's, you know what I'm talking about, Dan, or am I speaking Greek right now?
You can tune leaf springs. I believe you change the rate by it's how many leaves are in the pack and how thick each leaf is and how long they are.
And how long the shackle is too. And the position of the shackle too.
Mm-hmm. And where that's pivoting. But I think most people don't use, like for Joe and I in our world, you don't use a normal coil because now the coil is such big diameter and then you have to have a shock somewhere and you can't get the amount of travel out of it that you need. So a normal standalone coil would be more for trail rig or daily driving vehicles. If you didn't have a limit strap on it and you held, because I had Aerostars on my Toyota a long time ago, and I made these aluminum pucks that held it to the mount on the axle and the mount on the frame. I was a 17-year-old and I didn't know what limit straps were. Just let the shock bottom out and stretch that thing to like 30 inches, and then you'd come off the rock and it would still be leaning on one side because you stretched it past its
fatigued.
Yeah, it's just fatigued and back and forth. But
Kevin, did you ever see that Toyota I built way back when? That no limit cut up that had the crazy coils on it?
No.
I thought for sure you'd send that one. I cantilevered the coils. It was like I used like an Aerostar coil, like you're saying, or something like that. I can't remember what I used, but I cantilevered the coils to get more travel out of it. And it was a 4-link.
So you put it on a link or something?
I did a 4-link and I mounted the coil forward of the axle. Mm-hmm. So
changing your rates completely then.
Yeah, it was. I was like doing something
trying
stupid.
Stuff.
Yeah, mad scientist.
But Phil ended up cutting it apart. Like he took the whole back end of the car out. I don't know what I think it went somewhere else.
For that reason, probably because it didn't work.
Oh no, it worked. It was a little,
it's like, oh god, no.
It was a little bit floppy. It was a little bit floppy, but it actually wheeled pretty good.
Yeah, and I've always heard that too. I mean, I haven't really dabbled in, but like the cord ellipticals, you cut leaf spring in half pretty much. You bolt it to the frame, and then you flip the spring upside down, and you go down to the axle. And that is also tipsy too. But
I did one of those too. It was not very good.
Well, that was used a lot in the early rock crawling days before coilovers became prominent. That was a way to get really big travel out of it because you cut that leaf spring in half, and you made a box that the center pin held it in, and then there was a bolt that it pivoted on. So when it drooped out, the springs weren't under any load. It would go as long.
A lot of droop.
Sloppy.
Yeah.
That's what everybody's going for. Sloppy and tipsy, right?
Yeah.
But none of us knew anything back then. It was just, we can go to the junkyard and grab this stuff and put it on. And there it is.
Yeah.
Actually, that Toyota got me thinking of another question Zach actually had for Dan. There was a Toyota mid-engine car you built years ago.
The legend.
Yeah, and we want to know what happened to that.
The Hilux thing.
And
Dan doesn't like talking about, just so you know. Like he's already getting
scratching.
Wasn't that supposed to be like in the first KOH? Is that what you're doing with that, or what was it?
Well, I was building it before that. It was a once again 1980 Toyota first gen, and I had built it was a plate subframe. It was all at an 1/8 inch plate, TIG welded together, and had Rockwells. It was just front steer. It wasn't going to be 4-wheel steer. And I put a mid-engine 454 in it, turbo 400. It was an Atlas with 2.5 inch coilovers. It was just something I had built in my head, and I was on the internet one day and I saw pictures of Robbie Gordon's mid-engine trophy truck. That was, I think, in 2006, 2007. And he had a whole plate subframe. I was like, I'm going to do that, but for a rock crawler, and started doing that. I think that truck actually brought me a whole lot of attention. Mm-hmm. And then I didn't end up finishing it, but in 2009, Dave Cole called me, and that's how I got my first invite to KOH, because in 07 and 08, it was invite only. And then we got down to the lake bed. I ended up borrowing my friend Travis's car that I had built for him, and we converted it from a Calrox comp buggy into a KOH car, or what we thought would be a KOH car. But I ended up finishing it. I sold it to Slee Off-Road in, I think he was in Colorado. And then he ended up selling it to, I think there's a guy in Washington that has it now. It's blue and gold.
He did finish it though, right?
They cut a whole bunch of stuff off of it, which, I mean, if I knew what I know now, back then it would have been totally different. But it looks nice now. It doesn't have Rockwells in it. It's, I think, a 14 bolt and a 60. Or no, it's got Spider Trax housings in it.
But at the time, it was innovative though. At the time,
it
made a lot of waves. And of course, Dan would post on Pyre. He'd post a picture of like just the back section, and then not leave any comments. And everyone's like, "What the?" You know.
10 pages later, he'll chime in with like a little.
Well, I started building it, and I didn't pay any attention to, like, when you build a mid-engine car now, and you take the diffs and you flip them upside down to make it drive the correct direction. Well, the Rockwell, it drives from the top and then has its own basically ring and pinion, and then drives the bull gear underneath. And I forget, I had a friend who used to build, heavy truck differentials, and he was over there one day, and he's like, "This is going to drive backwards." So what? So this isn't going to turn the right way. Well, you need to flip the pinion gear over. So I had to we took those out. He took them apart for me. Ended up giving them to a machine shop guy across the parking lot. And we opened up one side for the bearing to fit. One side was smaller than the other. And then he machined a spacer, and we put it in the other side, and then flipped the pinion over, and now it could drive the correct direction. But that's the same thing. You just start.
So are you saying that originally the car would have driven backwards?
Yep.
Yeah, I would have just put a sticker over R, and now D is R, and you have 3 reverse gears.
3 reverse and 1 forward.
Yeah.
It sounds like that vehicle was like the first like weld porn, like, or fab porn.
Yeah.
On Pyre.
Yeah, it was
I think he had dimple dyes back then too.
Yeah.
Yeah, I did have a few dimple dyes in it. No, there was a lot of dudes building some pretty cool stuff back then.
Okay, next comment question. This guy wanted to talk about lengths, wheelbase, cross-member fab. Like a little sub-question on there I threw in was, how do you guys decide like wheelbase when building a chassis?
I have a ratio that I won't disclose for track width and wheelbase, but that's pretty much where you need to start. They should be proportionate to each other.
Huh. I'll talk to you about this after the podcast.
Take notes.
Yeah, I mean, the link lengths, just trying to make the lowers as long as possible, because the longer they are, the less pinion angle change you have, the bigger arc it moves in. It's not going to do anything weird and sporadic. It's just going to
Maybe touch on the instant center, because that kind of matters with the.
Yeah, I was gonna say not.
The instant center is kind of a loose term, but I prefer the height of it to be in a crawler. The height of it to be similar to the center of gravity of the car, so center of mass, right? So,
yeah, because then it's moving around it.
Yeah. So, but I know that like on a comp crawler, they'll move it. It would be up, so that the roll center increases, right? Gets higher, and then the vehicle is more stable on side hill. So I know you can play with that number a little bit, but on a go fast car, it's pretty much in front of the car by 5-6 feet. You know, I'm just generalizing right now, and probably just at center of mass or center of gravity, and then down a little bit. You know, gives the rear end a nice plush feel if you're going fast. Again, it's about speed. So if you're going fast, but if you bring the instant center back into the car, then the car will kick and pogo and hop around as you're going fast through the desert. You know, just generally speaking, you know. And if it's too long, I think it has like a weird, like the vehicle will do weird stuff. It doesn't react like the throttle inputs and that kind of stuff. It's just kind of like becomes like almost a vanilla feeling car. Is that, you know what I'm trying to say, Dan? So if the instant center is too far ahead, the links are too long, the car doesn't react to anything.
It's sluggish or slower behind or something like that.
Yeah, so you step on the gas, nothing happens. You get on the brakes, nothing happens. There is no torque reaction, or less of it.
Oh, they're just like dragging, like pretty much dragging something behind you.
Yeah. So like you know, like if you're gonna time a jump or something like that, and you want to get on the gas and try and get the front end to lift, it doesn't do anything. You know, no matter how much power you have. So kind of have to. I always kind of that instant center with the 4-link kind of in front of the car a little bit.
I guess that would mess with that. Go back to that squad or anti-squad, right?
Yep.
They're too far back.
They're very similar. They work together, obviously.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't know, we got off track there. We were talking about stuff, and I
don't remember.
World.
But I mean, in your cars, you pay a lot more attention to that than obviously we do. I mean, you're balancing the whole system, the whole car. The driver's in the middle, the gas tank's on each side. They're both even. You're trying to balance out every single corner, so you have the same reaction no matter where you go, what you're doing.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit different than a trout-beaded Cherokee.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, we're building cars that are fundamentally screwed from the beginning, with the motor being behind. The moment of inertia is in the wrong spot. It's trying to make something work with a bunch of parts that weren't meant to run the ways that we're running them.
Backwards.
Makes it a lot harder.
And why do you guys do that then? Is that just to get the weight more centered, or
more? To me, it's like packaging a mid-engine car is way easier than trying to build a front-engine car. And the driver, the vision's better. You have more foot room. There's so much more room to mount things down low,
yep.
Which is a big deal. And if something's on fire, it's behind you, which kind of sucks because sometimes you can't see it and you don't know you're on fire. But I think overall, I would rather build a mid-engine car as a race car than a front.
Same here. Like my main reason is because if you take the car as a whole and you think of what's going to take you out of KOH, for example, as a race, then you do a front engine car, you've got the exhaust coming down by the floorboards, it's going by the transmission cooler lines. You know, all this stuff goes on that can possibly lead to some type of failure. You've got tighter clearance with drive lines and carrier bearings and things passing by them. And with a mid-engine car, you can definitely keep the heat and the fuel and the mechanicals more separate from each other, so that they don't interfere with each other, and then possibly do something, you know, to wipe something else out. And you know, so like I know that for our cars, I don't think we've ever had any kind of heat soak or
vapor lock
issue, nothing, like never. But when you do a car that's got a fuel tank in the back, the fuel lines are running forward past the exhaust up to the motor, you know, they're just
less efficient.
Just less efficient, and they're just, you know. But the downside is, like Dan was saying, is the differentials, you know. So we have to flip the diffs over, which actually is good for the front, believe it or not, but it's bad for the back one because it's running the wrong side of the ring gear. But that's a whole other topic.
We can dive pretty deep into that, but it's the same thing as or having having the motor behind you and the radiators in the back window, so now your lines are shorter. The fuel tank is back there, or maybe in Joe's case, their saddle tanks and sitting next to you, which that makes the lines shorter. Anytime you can if you can shorten plumbing, like trying to shave weight off a race car is really hard, and really the only way to do it. If you look at everybody's car, everyone has an LS motor. Everyone has a Turbo 400. Everyone has an Atlas or an SCS case. Everyone's running Gearworks 10s. They all have 2-inch coilovers and 3-inch bypasses. Like the knowns of the parts that are on there, everyone's the same weight. The only way you can save weight is changing the thicknesses of materials you use and using less of it, and then shortening the wiring and the plumbing. And you take plumbing and how much fluid is in all of those lines that run from the back of the car all the way to the front of the car, that does add weight.
And complexity, and possible for heat soak for other stuff. And so...
And the exhaust has to be longer. If the motor's in the back, the exhaust is super short, so you save weight there.
I'm over here just seeing how many ice chests I can fit in the back of my bed.
A lot. I've seen it.
Okay.
That motor forward.
Next question we have. This is actually a question that I'm also curious about. When planning a build such as a roll cage and an exo cage, do you guys prefer planning on paper, digitally, or just winging it?
Well, I don't build exo cages.
Yeah, I can't stand
ever.
exo cages.
So
Okay, when you build a roll cage.
Okay, guys. I built one.
Oh, I built many. Yeah, I built many.
Actually, I built two, now that I think about it. I'm sorry.
My first one was exo, yeah.
no, I've done majority of stuff on paper, or it's been a long time since I built a cage inside of a vehicle, but you have to start with the main hoop. So you take your measurements from inside the cab where you can fit, draw it on the floor or draw it on paper, bend it out, get it in there once it's fitted. Everything else, you pretty just measure as you go. At least that's faster for me, just because I didn't learn on a computer program. Just draw it out and bend it.
What about you guys?
Yeah, how do you design your chassis? Is it all on paper, computer? What do you...
I do a little bit of both. So I'm not... So
you're a visionary.
So Dan and Kevin are both way more 3D CAD savvy than I am. They may not act like it. Kevin's really good. Dan, I think, I'm not sure.
Dabbles.
Dan's a dabble. Dan's he's a dabbler, but he's...
I'm the Amish fabricator.
Yeah.
But he knows how to use it. Stone. You know?
Whereas I'm actually further behind than they are. So I do use CAD a ton, but it's mostly 2D CAD. But I also wing it, you know. It's weird. I'm sure, Dan, you guys can relate to this, but there's been times where I've totally overthought a cage and done it like on the computer and laid all my bend starts and all that kind of stuff. And it doesn't turn out great. And then the times where I've been like, screw it. I'm going to bend this sucker up. And I just get in there and go for it. It turns out way better. Mm-hmm. You know, just because I'm just kind of, I'm on autopilot. I'm just going for it rather than trying to overthink where the bends are. And
plus, you can probably make more like adjustments on the fly, right? When you have a plan, it's hard to like veer from that plan.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, or because now you're just getting frustrated, and that's
in the back of the day, and Dan has too, but I did a lot of like cages, like in like race cars and street cars, that kind of stuff. Not a ton of them, but I mean, we're probably talking maybe 10, 20. So when you're working inside a car, that really is my least enjoyable type of fab.
Mm-hmm.
I like open space fab versus that, but and you kind of learn to just kind of there's a lot of things that a CAD program can't tell you. Like you spend more time measuring than you do actually building in that kind of situation, if it's inside a cab anyway.
Yeah, and I and myself in our shop, we use SolidWorks a lot. We do a lot of CAD stuff. We're not building the whole cage. Like we're not spending hours building a cage on the computer. That's just a waste of time. There's no need for that. But for the main big, B pillar, A pillar, whatever you got to build, it's just easier to like kind of, even if I'm going to give the plans to a guy out in the shop, I'm not necessarily building it, but I'll lay out, the B hoop, which has 6 bends in it. Now they know where to market the whole tube, then how long to cut it. And it just makes that one go quicker and easier for them just to get it out and get it in there. And then they can do the small tubes going around it. So, I mean, I use, the computer CAD quite a bit.
Yeah.
But I'm not 3D dimensioning it. I'm just doing 2D flat. I could do it on paper too, but it already reads how much tube or material stretched in that corner. So that's always a hard thing to figure out. Just cut it long and just start bending to get there.
I will say this, and maybe Dan can chime in. interior cages are probably the one that's the most screwed up. Like people build some very unsafe interior cages. Like if you're home building and you do it wrong, it's
One-time use.
yeah, one-time use. So the methodology for building an interior cage, you know, the desert guys have it down. You know, you cut holes in the floor, you drop the cage down, you weld it all the way out. It's pulled back up. You have plates that go on the chassis. If with a little bit of research, if you do the cage right, you're good. But that's one area you should never shortcut.
Yeah, I don't know how my cage is still in my truck. I have an interior cage, hit my head all the time. I built it wrong. I built it 8 years ago in like a weekend. It was dumb because I wanted to go, and I built I have extended cab Toyotas, and my B pillar and my C pillar are too short. They're like 4 inches short than the cab. I didn't have enough material, so I was like, that's what it is. I just made my seat lower, and three quarters of my cage is welded. There's still gaps on top because I was too lazy to drop it down and finish those welds. And now that more and more sheet metal is getting ripped back, I can finally get to those welds. But it's I've had that thing upside down so many times and rolled it endlessly over and over in the desert. And it's still there. I mean, it's bent to hell, but it's still there, and I'm surprised. But
I've done a few cages where I've cut the roof off after I've gotten it all tacked on and burned it through. I've cut holes in people's dash. I've taken the windows out and connected it to the A pillar and gone down through the floor. But you're pretty much limited on what the customer will let you do.
Yeah, where they want to spend. You know, it's like either you're doing it yourself.
You're like, I'm going to cut your roof off. They go, what? What do you mean you're cutting my roof off?
Pulling windows.
Which actually brings me to one point. I know that all three of us will easily turn away work if it's not, like, if a guy came to Dan and said, hey Dan, can you do this? And Dan's like, that's not the right way. No,
I want to do it that way.
Nope. And I'm kind of the same way. Like I'll just go straight. I'll turn away work. No problem. I have no issue telling the guy no, especially if he's asking me to do something that's fundamentally wrong.
Yeah. Well, why would you want involvement in something that's really dangerous? Especially if people have like a family rig and they want to take their wife out or their kids and things like that. Then that kind of involvement, that's really scary. So I think you guys are making the right decision.
Even beyond that, it's kind of that stubborn fabricator thing. Like I know that all three of us are pretty driven to do things the right way. So even if you took safety out of it. It's stubbornness, yeah. I mean, stubbornness. You know, even if you took safety out of it, it's got to be done right. Like Dan's not going to weld something, or Kevin's not going to build a bracket for someone that he knows is junk.
Or going to fail,
or you know, and it's not a signature of who he is. You know,
absolutely. So, you're putting your name, that's putting your stamp on your work. So I absolutely respect that.
Yeah, we had a guy with a D-Max come in the other day with a straight axled it from some other guy, but it's a piece of 1.25 inch, maybe 1.3 inch. It was 1.25 inch tie rod. I don't know how thick it was, but they halfway welded some jam nuts on the end, and that's what they threaded their tie rod together. It wasn't even fully welded. It wasn't nothing. It was just, you know, bird poop welds around a jam nut. It's probably zinc coated, and just 1.25 inch tube. I mean, I was scared. I'm like, we're fixing this while we fix your brakes. And he's like, oh, okay, I guess.
Back on the roll cage design and making. If someone knew where to come to you and ask you for advice, like what would you be like, hey, these are the things you need to do when you're making a cage. Like, here's how you, I know they're so versatile, like you can go inside, outside, or whatever. Even if it's an exo cage, like what would you say structurally what you want someone to be doing?
Less bends and more triangulation.
Yeah, I'm all for less bends. Just makes the biggest things, make sure your notches are good. Because as long as they're touching and you've got them really tight in there, and if it is an exo cage and you can't get all the way around it and you're still left, let's say there's 3/4 inch on the backside that faces the cab that you can't get to. If it's a good notch and you welded it good around the outside, it's probably going to be
fine.
Yeah, you're going to have two materials hitting each other. You're not going to have, you know, a gap that's not touching anything. Now you're letting it flex, and it's going to crack. And now you're using the weld material as your filler, and that's not the right way to.
Yeah.
So to expand on that, though, nodes, no dead ends, no tubes laying in the middle of a tube with no backside support. You know, like Kevin was saying, proper triangulation. You know, if it's a cage, you know, the B pillars at least a main single diagonal. You know.
Yeah, that's the backbone of the whole thing is the B pillar.
Protecting your head.
Yep. So cage design is primary, And I'm going to go on a limb here right now, and I would say cage welding is actually secondary. Meaning you want the welds to be good, but you can take a guy with a 110 welder, MIG welder, and if he designed the cage top notch and he glues it together, it's probably going to be okay. You know,
well, you can get enough amps out of a 110 MIG welder to burn 1/8-inch material. Like if you can't penetrate 1/8-inch material, then you have no business building a cage.
Someone else I knew you guys were coming on wanted me to ask you this. So it's about MIG welding tube properly, and how do you get or not properly, I guess properly would be like the penetration, right? But actually making your welds look nice. And the way he was explaining it was when you start it's cold, and when you stop it's hot, so it's high.
Just note that I'm pointing at Dan.
Yeah.
I prefer if I'm gonna MIG weld a cage, which is rare. I like 030 wire. It's a little more controllable than 035, and 5/1000 doesn't sound like a lot, but it's actually quite a bit when you're shoving wire out. But I usually set the machine up. It'd be a little slower on wire speed, and even in the wintertime I do it a lot. I'll take a MAP gas torch and I go around the joint and try to get it slightly warm. Tack it on 180 degrees from each other, and you can do it in 4 sections. I try to do 180 wherever I can, so I start on one corner, come down and around the face, and then back up to the other side. And as far as patterns to make it look nice, I mean, there's so many ways you can move the gun to manipulate it and make the dimes that
look good,
everybody likes. But I generally move in a J, so I'd be on the bottom tube, and then come back up into the upper tube, and then move forward back into the bottom, and then back up into the top, or just straight forward and back. I've never really done circles.
Yeah, I don't do circles
because I feel the circles just kind of leave an overlap unless you pay attention, you're making sure you stay in the puddle and not jumping forward. But that's kind of why I like the J, just because you're constantly in the puddle, but you're feeding it back and you're building up the material, so the weld is convexed instead of concaved or flush.
And I always kind of compare it to like an E-clip, like my weld, not like a C, but I always bring you always want to bring that puddle. You always want to keep that puddle going. You don't want to jump out of that puddle where you're creating that cold dead zone under that puddle. You want to keep the sides going and really bring it all the way through.
Like a cursive E.
Like a cursive E
or question mark. I always say question mark.
Yeah. Question mark. Yeah, because we don't know what we're doing.
So. Yeah, no, what the hell we're doing. No.
I guess one important thing though, Dan, or Kevin, I think mistake that people make is they pull the wire out of the puddle. I know that's one big issue. So.
Well, then when you start, just like you said, you start on one side and it's cold, which is I try to do with the MAP gas torch and heat it up a little bit. And you could start on the other side of your tack and work your way around. But if you're going around 1 3/4 or 2-inch diameter tube, and it's not going to take very long for it to heat up. So by the time you're just trying to word this correctly because we can't show pictures. You're starting on the upper left and you come down to the point of the fish mouth, it's going to be hotter, and now you went from kind of downhill and now you're trying to burn uphill, and you've put heat into the materials, and now
it's going to melt.
You're going to have to compensate for that and start moving quicker, or you're going to blow a hole in it. Or there's some guys that set the machine relatively low so they can move slower and have more control, but I don't necessarily agree with that. You set it to what the machine needs to be, and you move accordingly, and you can change. The closer you have the contact tip, you can move it away and long arc it to try to cool it down, and then move the tip back closer to the material, or bring it back out as you're making the.
It will make a difference a little bit, but it's a difference for sure.
Yeah.
What about did you explain like push pull? Do you change your angle too when you're?
And that's what I was going to say too. I went back to your point with the 3.0. I use 3.0 on a lot of things. I mean, you're only burning 1/8-inch material. You're not using structural 3.5 for 1/4 3. It's whatever. It's like it's a small amount of material. You look at TIG welds, it's a small weld. You don't need a giant 1/2 inch weld on 1/8 inch DOM or electrical tubing.
Where you're TIG welding, you're using generally a 1/16 or
it's small.
3/32
Again,
wire.
as long as your notch is there, it's your contact.
Well, the weld is small, but the
Yeah.
wire is bigger than what you would use in a MIG weld. But that's because you're shoving wire out at such a higher rate of speed than dabbing it into the puddle.
Yeah, and again, like the 3.0, I slow mine down so it's more controllable. So I can sit in a puddle and really make it do what I want it to do. Welding, we have our manufacturing side, the guys who weld all day. They have 3.5 and they're doing 1/4 inch, and they just kind of want to get the good weld, but they penetration. But me, it's not artwork, but you want to make sure that you're making decent welds on the DOM. And yeah, the push pull thing, it depends if you're vertical, flat, overhead. A lot of times it's a lot easier to push, but you're pushing, you're not bringing contaminants back into it, and
Yeah.
there's a whole angles are huge for sure, and you can't always get that perfect angle, but you just got to move with it.
Does TIG welding help with like the heat affected zone too, as far as strength, or does that even come into play with you guys?
This is a whole other can of worms, but basically with a TIG weld, the heat affected zone is more concentrated. So
It's like a smaller range, right?
Yep. So it's a smaller range, but it's also I would say you have a higher heat component at the joint, but it's not spread out amongst the tube as much, which actually in some ways is kind of a bad thing, believe it or not, because the bigger the HAZ is, the heat effective zone is, the more ductile the tube will be when stress travels to the joint. So if the stress travels through the tube to your weld joint and you have a very narrow HAZ, that actually means that when it's being stressed, that stress peak is steeper, right? Is that I'm saying it the right way? Steeper, which will cause it to fracture sooner. Whereas if you have a bigger HAZ, you'll end up having a bigger zone for the stress to slowly deform into the tube before it gets to the joint. Does that make sense? Am I saying it the right way?
Because if you crash, the weld's going to stay with your tube because it's so heated all the way up the tube. That's going to snap first.
Yeah. So
you can spread it out across the tubes more evenly than.
Yeah. So a crazy thing is like NASCAR, all MIG welded robots. And they've done extensive testing, and so you're not going to see a TIG welded NASCAR chassis. Doesn't happen. So there's rules. There's definitely an argument on which one's actually truly stronger. But again, it comes back to the design of the chassis. So personally, I think Dan's kind of agreeing with me here, but TIG welding gives you a cleaner finish, a cleaner end result, and done properly, it's incredibly strong, especially when the cage is done, designed properly as well. So
ultimately the joint is only as strong as the person putting it together.
Yeah.
Whoever's welding it. If you can there's tons of examples of it all over the internet now. Really nice, fancy TIG welds that are underfilled or just pulsed together or fused together.
Yep.
Lack of rod. Everyone's just worried about.
There's a lot of Instagram heroes right now that are doing it very, very improperly.
Right.
Yeah.
Do you guys play around with different filler types, or do you just 80, 70?
Just depends. Yeah.
Yeah. If it was, I only use ER80 or 4130 for suspension parts or anything that was going to get heat treated, which I know Joe disagrees with me about. Anything that wasn't going to get heat treated, I always just use the ER70. There's no reason to use 4130 or ER80 on the chassis.
I don't necessarily disagree with Dan, but there's things so I'll give you some examples. If it's a custom fabricated pitman arm out of really thin chromoly, for example, and ER80 to me is a great, filler to use there. We know that's going to be heat treated and it'll be fine. When it's parts that are going to be impacted, like hit with rocks and you're going to smash into things, then I prefer the ductility of ER70, even if it's in a heat treated part. But we're honestly talking like we're splitting hairs,
Right. Yeah.
So
This concludes part 1 of this episode. Please tune in a few weeks for part 2.